Hello and welcome to Stir Emotion's first webinar. Stir Emotion is our new content division and it launched earlier this year, and we're delighted to bring you our first webinar here with Darren, our executive producer, today. Thank you everyone as well for sending in the questions ahead of time. We'll make sure that we have got time to get to those as well before we finish up. So Darren, we're here today to talk about all things content and trends that we've seen this year emerging, and also some considerations that brands and agencies should really be thinking about when coming to create content this year.
Yeah, I think the content landscape is evolving at such a pace. Social media channels are changing rapidly, and the way in which people consume content is changing, day on day. So what we've done is picked out 6 key trends that we think are really interesting right now and relevant to brands who are trying to kind of activate through content, and we'll talk through those 6 kind of core trends in a bit more detail.
Brilliant. So without further ado, what's the first one?
So the 6 key topics we're going to talk about today are authenticity and trust, the creator economy, community creativity, show don't sell, short format, high impact, and research and answers.
Right, so let's start with authenticity and trust. So those are probably 2 of the most overused phrases in PR and actually probably in comms in general. And obviously we're all very aware of the fact that particularly when you're working in the earned space, everything needs to feel authentic. We need to be building that trust with our end consumer. So that's really clear. But why is it so important now more than ever when it comes to creating content for brands to make sure that it is feeling authentic? Because, you do see some brilliant ads out there that are still very much clearly ads. They're going to get paid spend put behind them. But they are becoming even more authentic. They're storytelling more. They are doing that emotion-led piece. But when it comes to brand-led content, why is it a trend for 2023?
Well, I think trust is earned through authenticity, right? So people trust brands that are authentic in their tone of voice. And, there's 2 parts to that. There's the part where, consumers are very savvy to advertising. As consumers, even in the industry, we engage less and less with conventional advertising, right? And, to us, the things that we probably enjoy the most are things that don't feel like ads because they're authentic to the platform in which they're on. So, in terms of brands engaging with consumers, they need to be smarter in how they earn the trust. They need to do that authentically. Now, whether that is, kind of creating comms directly from a brand, or whether that's working with influencers or content creators, I think with the latter, influencers and content creators, people have become a lot more savvy to, how the world of content creators kind of push and promote products. And so brands need to be a lot more savvy with their partnerships, make sure that they are authentic, make sure that they're not just, someone else delivering something in an ad style format. And also, that they're coming from content creators that their consumers trust, that actually resonate with their audience. And then I think in terms of authenticity for brands, creating content through channels, it needs to be right for the channels. So, if we look at how content's moved to being so short form in the last few years, even the nuances between YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, all short format, anything from kind of 5 to 20-second formats, but the way in which people consume those formats and engage with those formats and those channels is all completely different. So, brands need to consider how they create content specifically for each channel that is authentic, because, if you look at Instagram, it's more visually driven. If you look at TikTok, there's a lot more kind of lo-fi creativity on that platform. And therefore, brands need to create content that is authentic in format to those platforms in order to resonate.
And then you obviously mentioned there about channels specifically needing to be authentic to that channel. What do you mean there in terms of, how does being authentic on YouTube differ to being authentic on TikTok, for example?
Yeah, so if we look at the way that content channels have changed in the last few years, specifically social platforms, so, content has become more and more short form, right? So, YouTube used to be the long format channel where you could, put up a 2-3 minute brand ad, no worries, where, even YouTube now has moved towards YouTube Shorts. So you've got, YouTube Shorts, Instagram Stories, you've got TikTok, you've got Snapchat, and they're all these short format channels which, you know, from an Outlook, you're looking at kind of 5 to 20 second kind of you know, formats. However, the nuances of each channel are all completely different. So if a brand wants to be authentic to that channel, they need to create content nuanced to that channel. So you know, if you look at Instagram stories, they're very visually led, and you know, what works on there is different to what works on TikTok, which, you know, TikTok's a lot more kind of lo-fi, it's a lot more kind of cut and paste, and it's got its own kind of style and attitude. So I think, you know, as a brand, if you want to resonate with consumers on these different channels now, you've got to create content that is authentic to the way in which people are creating on those channels.
Yeah, and I actually want to talk a bit later on about short form versus long form, because I do have this conversation with clients quite a lot in terms of the benefits, so I think it'd be good to touch on that. But in terms of this channel-specific authenticity, obviously you've been working with Meta at the moment. What's the word on the street there? What's their view on making sure that we're being really authentic to different channels?
Yes, it's a good point. Actually, the kind of feedback from some recent work I've been doing with those guys is not to actually look at what brands are doing on the platform, but to look at what successful content creators are doing across Facebook and Instagram.
So actually learning from the influencers.
Exactly, yeah. Because if you think about it, right, I mean, you know, we're all consumers. You sit there, you're scrolling through your feed, you're looking at Instagram stories, right? If it comes to an ad, you're probably going to flick across it. So creating content that is more nuanced to the way in which creators make their content through the channels is much more likely to get people's attention and engagement. So, you know, that's things like using creative transitions, shooting on iPhone, and, you know, generally just making it feel more like creator-led content rather than a high-spec kind of glossy ad. So, yeah, I think, you know, for brands, they really need to consider how they create content for each channel specifically in order to be authentic and you know, resonate.
So talking about influencers and, you know, learning from them and their content, let's talk about the creator economy. So how has that evolved from just kind of slapping an influencer on a campaign?
So the creator economy is a really interesting evolution of the influencer economy that we've seen over the last, 4, 5, 6 years, right? So there's a massive shift in how people are using social channels to create content. So Adobe did a really interesting study, I think it was last year, called The Future of Creativity. And it basically showed that there was something like a 200% increase in the amount of people actually using social media channels as a creative outlet to create content. So the influencer economy, you know, essentially influencers became media outlets, right? They were kind of commercially driven, and, you know, they grew around the ability to broadcast a message. Whereas this increase in people that we're seeing using, you know, social media channels to create content is more around passion points. So it's not so much about the monetization, they're not so much commercially driven, they're using it you know, as a creative outlet, as you would traditionally painting or you know, writing music. And so it's really interesting seeing that kind of cultural shift, especially with Gen Z. I read another statistic where it's like 1 in 4 people in Gen Z use content channels to create. Whereas, you know, kind of 4 or 5 years ago, people were a lot more passive on social media. You know, they were using it to consume, observe, intake content. Whereas now people are using it a lot more to create around their passions and interests. Okay,
so it's Gen Z aside, because we are not Gen Z, but it's less about then you or I just using, you know, TikTok or Instagram to just follow influencers or consume content from influencers and brands. Actually, we ourselves are going on to express ourselves creatively, depending on what interests. So like running, for example, going and creating content around that and not expecting all these followers off the back of it, but actually just doing it because it's something that I love and enjoy and want to engage with.
Exactly, yeah. So I mean, case in point, I'm not Gen Z, but I'm a big petrol head, right? And you know, my Instagram over the last few years has changed to be my passion, which is cars and motorbikes. So you know, I create content and share content that is about my passion, and for me that's a creative outlet. I've got a friend, Chris, who I used to work with, who's set up a really good pizza channel called Doughball Disco, which is awesome, and it's just about him creating pizzas and just a whole world around pizzas, short format, interesting content, creating delicious food because that's his kind of creative outlet. And so I think, that's the shift. People are actually, using these channels more to do things around their passions. And that's where, from a brand perspective, it's really interesting. How do you get involved in that? It's not quite the same as traditional influencers, but how do you kind of fuel that fire and fuel that economy, and get involved as a brand to get your products through? Going back to what we were saying about authenticity and trust, if it comes from someone that is credible in that space, be it pizzas, be it automotive, be it travel, and you can get your product or your brand featured within that ecosystem, then it's going to be a lot more authentic, to the consumer and resonate better with them.
So how should brands be doing that then? How should they inject themselves in a way that feels real, that is going to build trust in these conversations? If it's groups of, your Joe blogs just creating this content and we want to get them engaged with our brand, what is the best way to be doing that?
So I think there needs to be a perception shift from a brand perspective, right, from quantity to quality, right? So it's not about, we take the shift from the focus from reach and getting maximum numbers, which is where the traditional influencer economy has gone. Like influencers have tried to grow and grow and grow their numbers because then they monetize it more like conventional media channels and how you would put traditional paid spend behind reach on any media outlet. Whereas with this creator economy, it's more about engagement and quality of engagement, right? So the shift should be to looking at quality of engagement. And it's not about getting, 10 million views, it's about getting 500,000 quality views. So, going back to my example of the pizza dough disco, if you're an olive oil brand, is it better that you have an influencer who gets 10 million, has 10 million followers, create something that has your product in it? Or is it better that you've got a hardcore audience that are really interested in pizza, that will use your product, and you use a creator that's got high engagement and is really authentic and people trust, then there's a shift.
Yeah, and you reap the rewards, right? It's like we did a piece of work at the end of last year, which actually was part of the inspiration for launching Stereo Motion as a division. But it was a content-led piece of work where we did exactly that. It was the launch of Cali by Snoop Dogg's new wine brand. We're launching it here in the UK. And we worked with up-and-coming rappers, all based in Manchester. So again, they had a good following, but no more than 100,000. And we identified them because they had such a highly engaged audience that were interested in rap culture. And we seeded them with some wine, and we basically wanted to get their creative juices flowing and see, what it sparked creatively when it came to rappers, and really infiltrating these niche communities rather than trying to go to the masses, when essentially as a wine brand, Cali by Snoop isn't for your usual wine drinker. So we identified these up and coming rap artists who are absolutely brilliant, super talented, and when they all came together in this cypher and created music that was inspired by Snoop Dogg and his journey and California and the wine, it was amazing, the engagement on it and the organic engagement on it, because we weren't relying on these, as you said, like huge followings that kind of follow them but don't really engage. They're not naturally drawn to that style of content. The engagement was huge. And actually, back to the authenticity and trust piece, because it came from people that felt relevant to that brand, felt relevant to Snoop Dogg and his history, even Snoop Dogg picked up the content and shared it. So we still actually got that reach in the end. But what was more important was that real authentic engagement. And I think, it's exactly as you're saying, it's not always about these kind of snazzy influencers, but it's these creators that we can tap into. And
I think, like you're saying, the move there is for brands to move away from high reach influencers to nano and micro influencers who are incredibly creative, within their own kind of sphere, and therefore are very authentic, and they're trusted by their followers, so they have high quality engagement.
Right, let's talk about community creativity.
So I think this is a really interesting trend that we've seen probably in the post-COVID world, really. So, obviously 2020 lockdown pandemic really changed the way that the world worked, and we all became a lot more used to remote working and adapting to kind of that creativity from a distance, right? So there's been a real interesting shift, I think, going back to what we were saying about the creator economy, people creating around their passions. It also allows people to connect over their passions with people that they'd never they're not connected with in real life. I was reading an interesting YouTube statistic the other day that I think it was like, nearly 70% of people watch videos on YouTube around passions and interests that none of their real life friends are actually into, kind of thing.
And so is this an influencer point, or do you mean, again, people that haven't got a massive follower but they're talking about things that we're interested in, so they're talking about running or pizza?
Exactly, yeah, not about influencers at all. And it's not all about creation either, it's about, it's about consumption as well as creation. So, it's about people joining virtually over things that they're passionate about, right? So there's an example I really like, the House Gospel Choir, who are a band essentially in London, who cover hits and make their own material, who have always worked together as a big unit, right? But when lockdown kicked in and they were forced, they couldn't get together and record music, then they started recording everything remotely. But also what that allowed them then to do was move their creativity beyond their kind of geographical bounds and cast the House Gospel Choir way wider than London. So all of a sudden they went from, 20 members to 100 plus members, which meant that even though, they were within these conditions that would, you would think would hamper creativity, not being able to get together and work together, it actually opened up the doors and they were able to bring more people in. And I think that's what community creativity is seeing a lot more now. Now people have adapted to, kind of more remote ways of working and co-creation. It means that you can make stuff with people around your passions wherever they're located in the world.
Right, and that's where algorithms come in, right? Because that's how you then find people that are, you might hashtag something and then your algorithm straight away is serving you that content constantly.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at the way, Instagram, TikTok, etc. have adapted over the last few years, I mean, they probably know you better than you know you now in terms of what your interests are in. And, you look on the kind of recommended pages on the platforms, and the content that they serve you is so specific to your interests. So, through algorithms, through, specific community hashtags and stuff, people are able to connect a lot easier with, people around their passion and, follow those, collaborate with those. And, if you look at how Instagram and TikTok have brought in the duet and remix functionality in the last year, again, that's a really interesting kind of piece of collaboration technology that those platforms have brought in, which, all of these changes, they're all learning from how people are using their platforms and communities, and they bring in functionality based on that. So the ability to duet or remix and take someone else's song and add your own vocal to it or your own layer to it, create your own music video, is what's really kind of fueling this community creativity. And I think that's what we're going to see a real rise in over the next few years, is people virtually collaborating over their passion points.
Okay, so I'm a brand manager of a brand that's all about adventure travel, engaging people, bringing people together that have shared passion points that will want to travel together and experience similar things. How do I, if I'm seeing this community of people talking about these passion points, talking about this topic, and I want to infiltrate that conversation from my brand's perspective in a way that is going to entertain them, feel natural, play in their space, rather than just interrupt with my message and throw it in there? How do I do that as a brand? Yeah,
so the key thing there is not interrupting, right? It's about fueling the fire. So you need to look at how you can get involved authentically. So, travel content on, Instagram, TikTok, etc., hugely popular. The whole Wanderlust theme has been a massive thing, for years now, right? And I think one of the great things about travel, and specifically adventure travel, is that it is highly visual, it is highly impactful, and we're all sat here in London wishing that we were on a desert island or, climbing a mountain or whatever. So I think from that perspective, like as a brand, you need to ask yourself how you get involved authentically, right? And, the way I'd say that you do that is you've got to look at how you can add value, right? So you don't go in there, asking in the traditional influencer way, here's our product, here's our 3 proof points, this is the way that we want to use it, here's our brand line. That's not going to fly. But if you can get people using your product in an authentic way, whether you're, this adventure brand might be a roof tent or a hiking boot or a food brand, if you give these creators your products to use, inevitably they'll go out there and they'll create authentic content around them that people will trust, and it will resonate, and it will be authentic to the channels. And
that's what becomes our content, right? So it's more about that UGC piece, because we know UGC is, performs way more than brand-led content. And I guess we're seeing quite a few of these adventure travel brands using content that's generated by their existing customers or their existing communities to put that out there. So why is that going to perform? Why do we need to keep that front of mind rather than always thinking that we have to create all the content ourselves?
Well, I think I was reading an interesting statistic by Snapchat this week where ads that featured user-generated content were something like 300 times more likely to get watched to the end than traditional brand ad-shaped content on that platform specifically. So I think, again, going back to what I was saying earlier, we're all consumers. We sit there flicking through our social feeds. Like, if we see something that's an ad, we immediately turn off. If you see something that feels like a piece of interesting travel content that inspires you visually and rouses your interest, if it's got product X featured authentically in there because someone's using it, then your awareness and your affinity to that brand is going to be a lot better than if you just watched a conventional ad.
So key takeouts then for me, brand manager: find these communities that already have these natural passion points, fuel the fire with authentic and engaging content from our side, but then also use UGC where possible, because actually it's probably the best and most real content that we can have in our arsenal.
Yeah.
That leads us nicely onto this show, don't tell concept, right? So let's talk a bit about that, because I think it's a really important part of all our conversations with our clients about creating a narrative that will emotionally engage with their consumers. And we know from research that emotion-led campaigns are 29% more profitable. So that storytelling piece, that bit where you're going to trigger some kind of emotion within your consumer, is really key. So how do we use content to, I guess, drive this narrative, show but not tell, but kind of create a story that immediately triggers something with the audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as we've already said, we're all consumers, right? And we know that we don't sit there and engage with brand ads in the conventional way that we used to, right? So, brands need to be more creative about how they show people their products rather than tell. Gone are the days of infomercials and holding a product and, telling your 10 key kind of selling points. As consumers, we want to be entertained, we want to be inspired, we want to be moved emotionally, and so brands need to show people their product in a compelling manner. I think a classic example is Apple when they launched the iPod, right? It's not it's quite an old example now, but I still think it really rings true. When they launched the iPod, it wasn't the best product on the market by any means. There was other MP3 players that had more storage or had a faster processor or were more compact or lighter, etc. But they all led with functional benefits. Apple came out and said, take 5 weeks of music with you, anywhere, anytime. And, simple, you get it. They showed you what it could do. They didn't tell you about the ins and outs of the product. They just showed you how you could use it and how it would benefit your life. And, that kind of storytelling approach is still, very relevant now. And, brands really need to think about how they show people their product in a compelling manner rather than trying to tell them product benefits.
I guess it's how it can become part of your natural lifestyle and add something to that. I mean, even growing up, watching movies and you see these big, gorgeous kitchens, especially in American films, and they would always have this lovely knife rack or stack of knives that were like almost intimidating. But I always associated that with being a grown-up. Right. Like, that's how you know you're an adult. You have a nice...
When you've made it.
Exactly. And the first thing I wanted to do when I bought my place was, I need some good knives. Yeah. I mean, I still don't know what half of them are meant to be used for, but it was like, right, I know I'm now suddenly a purchaser of knives. Yeah. I have no idea what I'm doing with them, and I don't actually care what they do, but that would mean that I'm now an adult. Yeah. So how would we translate that in a piece of content, for example?
Yeah, so let's take that as a fairly, it's a fairly functional, boring kind of household purchase, right? It's not something, although you aspire to own a nice set of knives and it's a bit of a statement piece, it's not something that you probably spend a lot of time researching or, you kind of spend time engaging with ads on knives. But, it's as you say, it's what benefit adds to your life, right? So, it's an aspirational item, and, by buying that, you think that you're going to have nice dinner parties and cook nice things. So, as a knife brand, I would be thinking, how do I, get into the consumer's mindset like that? So it's not about showing them, how sharp the blade is or how long the guarantee is. It's about creating some compelling content that shows the products in action, that inspires people or moves them emotionally. I mean, with cooking, it's a very creative process, right? So, you want to be inspired to create something. So, as that knife brand, I'd be thinking, right, how do we create a really compelling content series that will inspire people to use our products? And that content series itself would be different on different channels, right? As we were saying, it would be different from, Instagram to YouTube to TikTok. So, it would need to be authentic for each of those. And in terms of kind of showing someone a product on those different channels, you would do it in a different way, to the nuances of how people consume, but also create on each channel.
And I guess it goes back to the entertain piece as well, right? Because what you were telling me the other day about entertaining ads being more effective.
So there's lots of really interesting stats about how entertaining ads perform much better. I was reading one the other day on TikTok where I think the statistic was that entertaining ads are 25% higher in terms of brand affinity and 15% higher in terms of purchase intent. That's just some of the data, but I know as a consumer, things that entertain me are more likely, for me to build my affinity with that brand. And then, a lot of products are more of a long-term play, and it's about building the brand affinity. So when it comes to time to purchase the knives, for example, you're front of mind.
Yeah, and I guess that's also why I know that everyone is obsessed with targeting Gen Zs at the moment. But I think there is something to be said for starting this conversation and this engagement from a younger age, so that they start to build these stories themselves. They start to have these emotional connections with brands and products themselves. And then as they kind of become and they enter into that market, then suddenly you're still front of mind and you're more likely, and then you can build that longevity through the loyal fan base as well.
Yeah, and I think in terms of that kind of show don't tell approach, it's to your point there, like the longevity thing, right? The cost of entry to content creation is much lower now. We don't need to go out and create a £1 million content commercial, but we can create lots of smaller pieces of content that build up affinity, they build up awareness, and ultimately that's going to build up product intent. So looking at a strong content strategy that is going to work over time, rather than just looking at, the classic way of kind of doing a TV ad, a big, commercial once a year, will provide a much better return on investment from a strategic perspective.
So quick recap, show, don't tell. It's about creating this narrative, emotionally engaging them, and cut out the key message. It needs to feel natural to the audience.
Yeah, we need to stir emotion. We need to add value, whether it's entertaining, whether it's inspiring. We need to show our products in a way that's compelling to our audience.
So we've touched obviously a bit on different formats for different channels and different lengths of content. And we said we would come back to this kind of notion of short format and it having more higher impact. When we say short format, how short are we talking? Because, we know that it's important. Again, we're saying about doom scrolling, to stop that thumb, you've got to get someone's attention really quickly.
Yeah.
And often when we talk to clients about content creation, we'll often say, about getting a message or getting that attention within the first kind of 7 to 10 seconds. But what are the stats saying? Why is it important to kind of really be really punchy with that opening message?
Yeah, I mean, as social media channels have evolved over the last few years, content formats have got shorter and shorter and shorter, right? And, a few years ago, we'd be talking about creating a short piece of content for Facebook or YouTube that would have been 90 seconds, and that was kind of regarded as short format. Now I've been doing some work with Meta on a big campaign recently, and they are recommending optimizing content in 6 to 10 second kind of duration. Now, if you've got to get a brand in there, a product in there, a campaign message in there, in 6 to 10 seconds, you've got to be incredibly creative. So, you really need to create stuff that is high impact, that's visually impactful, that is authentic to the channels that it's on. But, the optimizing towards these short formats means you just need to be incredibly kind of creative with your message. But those that do it are really successful. There was a recent Snapchat statistic that said that brand recall on short format stories, if they're authentic in terms of the way that they're created, authentic to the channel, they've seen stats that brand recalls as high as 100%, which is incredible. But, to work in such a short format, from a brand perspective and a traditional marketing perspective, we've got to be incredibly creative.
And I guess that's where also these kind of sneak previews come into play, because we'll often, when we do create content for our clients, we'll do a bit of a tease at the beginning.
Yeah.
So whilst we can still have that space for a full story that we're going to create and tell in the content, you immediately are showing the consumer that it's worth staying tuned, because actually there's going to be this payoff, or we're going to get to this.
Absolutely. And I think, where we are creating shorter format, there is more, there's more room to tell, stories over multiple pieces. But we also need to remember that consumers are not always going to watch everything. They're not always going to see everything in contextual order, right? So, everything it can build into a wider story arc, but it also needs to work as a standalone piece. So you've got to deliver the payoff in that short format. But I think, for some industries, it works a lot better than others. For travel, for example, the visual impact that you can have, with landscapes and, kind of tourism content stuff and, aerial drone stuff and that GoPro footage in 6 to 10 seconds is incredibly impactful, right? Compared to other kind of, drier subject matters. So, but, it's about being creative about how you create that impact in such a short timescale.
So are we saying that short format is king, don't even bother with long format, or is there something to be said with hooking someone in with the short format and then maybe driving them over to another channel or another piece of content with your longer format where you've got more room for that messaging?
I think it depends who you speak to, because if you speak to any of the social media platforms, then they will tell you, probably somewhere between 5 and 15 seconds is absolutely optimal, and that is where you will see maximum ROI for your paid media spend. And if we're propagating content through those channels, then obviously getting maximum effectiveness and impact and ROI is what's key. But that's a very quantitative measure and approach to things, and I still believe that there is room for longer form content, and we should still be considering qualitative engagement. If we're a brand that's marketing around something that is a product that someone has a particular passion about, there's still room for longer form content and focusing on qualitative engagement. So, I think you need to have a quant and qual approach with every content strategy.
And we're actually seeing, aren't we, from consumer research, that a lot of consumers that are engaging with a brand through content and through longer form content have actually first heard of that brand off TikTok, for example. So actually we're seeing that short form content on channels like TikTok or even Instagram stories, and when you get kind of those via ads, then they are starting to kind of trigger that affiliation for the end consumer that then will take them to learn more, research more. And again, it's back to that kind of using these social channels to find out more rather than just to hear for the first time about.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to create an ecosystem with it. So, you can get people hooked on the short form content. You can then drive them to longer form content. There's some really interesting kind of data emerging around YouTube and YouTube Shorts and how that is actually driving people to watch longer form content within the platform. So, for instance, you're on the tube on the way to work and you might be scrolling through and you may watch a YouTube Short, but, that data is then all going into your profile. And, when I get home and I turn on my smart TV whilst I'm having dinner, and, quite often I'll turn on YouTube and I'll watch a 10 to 20 minute piece of content. The activity and the profiling of what I've done in the short form content is then fueling that longer form content. And you sit down, you have a more quality engagement because it's something that YouTube already knows that you like. And, it's not just YouTube, it works with the other channels as well. So.
And I guess then it's all about the propagation strategy, and we obviously talk about that a lot from a Stir in Motion perspective, but before we create any content, we sit down and we think, right, where is this going to live? What are the results that we need to deliver, and how are we going to do that, and what piece of content lives on what channel? Because I think so often you end up with either one big edit that is designed for, YouTube, for example, it's a long format piece of content and you've just got to make that work, or you end up with lots of short format content, short format piece of content that then are designed to live on, let's stick it on Instagram because we've got a big follow there. But whereas actually I think what's really interesting about this conversation is think beyond that one specific channel. You can have a bit of fun and be a bit more creative with what edits and cut downs you use on the different channels. You don't have to just be creating one piece that goes in one place and that's that.
No, exactly. And having a broader content strategy and understanding the role of each channel and creating content that is native and, you know, specific to each of those channels and the nuances of, you know, how people consume and create on those channels will ensure that you have a much higher impact.
So our final point is around research and answers. And I guess we just spoke a bit about consumers crediting videos that they've seen on TikTok for kind of piquing their interest in a brand or a service. How is it then, how does that evolve into, right, I've seen a product that I might be interested in, now I want to learn more about it before I go and actually make a purchase? Yeah,
so it's an interesting stat I saw last week where 72% of TikTok users who had either clicked to buy or clicked to visit a website had credited that action for some content that they'd found through a creator. So this whole kind of economy of using social media, you know, to ask questions and get answers on stuff that you're interested in, you know, is a real kind of increasing trend. I think specifically with Gen Z, you know, there's some data saying that they're actually using social media channels over traditional, you know, Google, over traditional media outlets to actually do their research and answers. So, you know, from a brand perspective, it's like how do we engage with that and how do we fuel the fire? If that's where people are going to learn about products, then how do we make sure that our product information, you know, is prevalent in those channels?
So I guess it's a bit of brands understanding that it can be a bit of a long game, right? So not long as in months and months, but if I've decided, right, I want to shake up my skincare routine, I'm starting to maybe either follow certain hashtags or there's some skinfluencers that I'm engaging with. These brands need to be there from the get-go. So even when I'm not ready to make a purchase, but it's just that research piece, I'm looking for the answers. And then it's kind of that's where the algorithms kick in. Yeah,
exactly. So, I mean, the skincare thing's a really interesting one. I mean, you know, it's no secret there's been a massive, you know, kind of surge of, you know, hashtag skinfluencers and, you know, skincare routines through, you know, TikTok and Instagram and other channels over the last few years, right? So, you know, looking at that one, you know, how do I discover it? Well, you know, the actual hashtag skinfluencer is a thing. So you know that you can just go on the channel, search that tag, and you will find an abundance of content, you know, around that topic. So from a brand, how do I get involved? Goes back to what we were saying about the creator economy, fueling that fire, getting your product out there, getting people using it in an authentic way, which then does the authenticity and trust thing, because, you know, it's coming through in an authentic manner. You know, you're showing me a particular moisturizer in an authentic manner, and I trust you because you're a creator I watch and I value your opinion, kind of thing. So, you know, yeah, as you say, it is a long-term play. Like, it's considering how you get your products in that ecosystem and how you get, you know, people kind of creating with your products. And it's not just about, you know, using influencers and content creators. You know, it's about creating your own, you know, authentic, compelling content as well. I was looking at Booking.com the other day, right? Like, they're doing some really, really good stuff on TikTok. You know, just based on travel trends and the nuances of how people create on that channel, and it's got a very different tone of voice, you know, to the rest of their channels. But that's why it works perfectly, because it's so well dialed in for that channel. So, you know, I think brands just need to be considerate about what they're creating on these different channels, and how people will use them to go and research and find answers for, you know, for questions.
Yeah, and again, as a consumer myself, I'm starting to play a bit of a longer game in that if I see, because I know the strength of the algorithms, yes, it can be really creepy, but actually it can be useful that I know if I go to research something, then actually next time I go on TikTok, I will be served something different, but again with the same, along the same theme. So maybe it's a different moisturizer or a different cleanser, and it means then that I feel like I'm kind of almost in a physical store exploring, because I'm being served different content that from different brands that's going to give me different information that I need or that I'm looking for, and it becomes a bit of this kind of perpetual loop of content curiosity because they know I'm looking for it, and so I'm getting served up, and so a week's gone by.
And the algorithms keep fueling your interest, right?
Exactly.
You know, and you're more likely to trust someone in that space, you know, who's creating content, who's reviewing this stuff, than you probably are going to a traditional, media outlet like, a magazine or, an independent kind of, platform. You're more likely to trust these creators because you engage with their content on a regular basis. You see their style, you trust them. They're authentic to what you believe in, kind of thing.
Fab, so we've covered our 6 themes and kind of almost trends then to keep in mind when we're creating content. And now let's get on to your questions. So again, thank you so much for them. We're not going to be able to get through them all, but we will at the end of this video leave our contact details. So feel free to get in touch and we can continue the conversation and answer anything that we haven't covered today.
Yep.
But should we have our first question? Darren, do you mind passing me my laptop?
There you go.
Cheers. Okay, question 1. Sometimes I struggle to explain the need to reduce branding within content to my superiors internally who aren't necessarily as close to the marketing and content world. What would your advice for me be? Or how do you go about explaining this to our clients?
So I think that's something we've covered a few times today is, first of all, you need to put your consumer hat on and think about how you as a consumer would engage with that content. So if you're scrolling through your Instagram feed, if you're on YouTube, TikTok, whatever, when you see that logo frame, it's the first second of an ad, is that going to turn you on or turn you off? Most likely, immediately, you're going to think it is an advert and you're going to scroll to the next thing. So what we really need to think about is how do we capture people's attention in those first few seconds? And, doing that is going to involve stirring some emotion, grabbing their attention, inspiring them, entertaining them, doing something that's compelling, and earning their trust to get them to watch your content. To then engage with it and introduce your brand and your product at some point. But, having a logo slug or having a brand logo as the first, second frame of a piece of content is almost certainly going to turn someone off.
Yeah, it's that show, don't tell piece.
Exactly.
And it's also in terms of, that point around navigating those conversations with your superiors or your broader team internally that aren't as familiar with the marketing mix and the ways of the marketing world. That's where we come in, first of all, as your brand partners and your agency partners. But also there's the piece around taking it back to, this isn't an advert, you're not creating an advert, and they'll be aware of that. And the reason why you're not creating an advert is because you want to be engaging people on a more authentic level. So already, it needs to live in the earned space. And so the rules are very different. But of course, you've always got your agency partners and ourselves to guide you through those conversations.
And there's plenty of data from all of the major platforms that back that up as well.
Exactly. Next question. In reality, do I really need to spend so much money making different edits for different platforms? It can get quite expensive. I mean, first of all, what I'm going to say here is I think we all need to kind of lose this notion of content creation having to be really expensive. And sorry, I know that we will get onto this question more specifically, but it is one of my bugbears in that the natural presumption is that you need to have massive production budgets to create this content, and it's just not the case. And it's a huge reason why we launched Stir in Motion, is that when you do it smartly and you create a piece of content that is earned at its heart, you can then create different cut downs that will live authentically in different channels. So first of all, I just needed to get that out because that preconception does my head in.
I mean, I think the start has always got to be a smart content strategy. Classically, people will make a piece of content and then try and propagate it out across all channels, and therefore it's expensive to try and edit it. We need a 15 for that and a 5 for that and a 10 for this, and then the story arc itself doesn't work because you've started from a long format story and you're now trying to create it in small pieces. So if you start with your content strategy, if you come up with an idea that works to that content strategy, then it's a lot more cost effective to deliver it to those platforms. Also, some of the themes we've been talking about today in terms of, shooting on mobile, using user-generated content, working with content creators, it's way more cost effective than the traditional approach of high production shoots. Not saying that there's not a place for that kind of stuff, but getting content out on channels, creating authentic content that is engaging is a lot more cost effective these days.
Next question. Darren, you're not going to like this one.
Okay.
What makes content go viral?
Oof, that's a dirty word.
So many times.
It's a dirty word in 2003 and it's no better now.
It's the classic brief of, we just want you to create a piece of content that goes viral.
Yeah.
It's as easy as that.
I mean, it's about value for money, isn't it? It's about spending as little as possible and getting maximum ROI. Now, the way that the internet is now set up, social media platforms are built on algorithms and such, there is no rhyme or reason to why stuff goes viral. You need to start with a great content strategy. You need to understand what channels you're going to use and how you're going to use them. You then, need to ideate to those channels. You need a great idea at the heart of it. Having content that, grabs people's attention, whether that's stirring emotion, whether that is inspiring, whether that's entertaining, but getting people's attention in that first 1 to 3 seconds is absolutely critical in terms of getting watches. Above that, compelling storytelling and engaging people in an authentic manner is what's going to get you your best chance at return on investment. The stuff that does go viral these days or does float to the surface, if it's from a brand, it's always started with a paid media strategy. And the propagation of that has done well and has created a surge, which then lifts it and gets more organic and earned reach. In terms of stuff that's done by content creators, generally there's no rhyme or reason. People get behind things, people get interested in different things. It's more about the right thing at the right time, and no one can really predict that. But there is no such thing as going viral anymore. It's about having a good content strategy and a compelling idea.
And that actually, you mentioned there about paid spend from branded content, and that leads us nicely onto another question that we've had around how much money would you advise putting down behind video content to boost its awareness, particularly when we're talking obviously social media and the different channels.
Yeah, I mean it's all relative to what your objectives are, right? So, understanding business objectives as part of the briefing process is key. Creating disposable content that just answers a short-term problem will never get the best solution. So if we understand what the business objectives are, we can develop a content strategy that answers that. We can make recommendations on how much you spend. The beauty of using kind of social media platforms for content propagation is that it's a sliding scale, and you can dial it up, you can optimize it, you can extend campaigns. So I always recommend adopting a test and learn approach, and putting some money behind it, dipping your toe in the water, see what works, see what doesn't. Change your assets, optimize against it, boost behind things that are working. If things really fly, then you can look to invest even more because you're going to get return on investment, and it's a safe approach.
Great. We'll do a couple more. The next one is, why is video seeing success in PR campaigns? And I think we've seen, particularly when you go to these kind of award ceremonies and industry awards nights across the sector, we are seeing a lot more video-led campaigns come to the forefront and picking up those trophies. And I think the key thing here is at the very heart of the STIR proposition, to be honest. It's back to that emotion piece and back to that stat around, 29% more profitable will your campaign be if it is emotionally led and if it stirs some emotion. And I think it's the same with content. It's one of the most powerful ways to stir emotion is showing someone something visual, showing something that will tell a story. When you compare that to a written press release or a brilliant picture, it feels obvious that this kind of more content-led storytelling and narratives are going to be more powerful for you. And that's exactly why we started Stir Emotion, right? Because not only are PR campaigns more powerful with content, but actually content is more powerful when it comes from a PR lens and an earned lens. Yeah,
I mean, it's a no-brainer. Over the last few years, the internet has become video first, all of the content platforms. I mean, Instagram's recently optimized reels in the feeds over still images, and basically everything that we consume is video-based content. So you know, you have to be creating video content to even be able to get people's attention in the first place. So, you know, as a brand, it's absolutely core to your kind of communication strategy. And then, you know, to your point about earned media and propagation, it's about, you know, understanding how we get it out there, how we propagate it, having a solid content strategy behind it. And, you know, just creating content that is going to resonate with people.
Great, and then final question, and again, apologies for those we haven't answered, but we will be around to take those off the back of this webinar. And this is quite a good one because we've spoken a lot about branded content and content that does well from content creators, etc., and different channels. But what is the difference between a branded video and a video that is designed to be used for PR purposes?
I think it comes down to the approach, right, doesn't it? So, you know, PR is very much about earning people's attention. And so, therefore, we know that if we need to earn people's attention, we need to do something that, you know, grabs them within the first few seconds. And that's what makes our approach to content creation much more cost effective, is because, you know, we come from a world where you have to earn people's attention in order to get something to fly. So, you know, we're not assuming that people are just going to watch our stuff. You know, we have to come up with ideas that are compelling and that grab you instantly.
Brill. Well, that's it for today. Thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Looking forward to having a lot more of these conversations with you. And as I said, we'll share our contact details, so do get in touch and hear more. And thank you, Darren.
Thank you, Shan.